Hi everyone, this is Kathy from KDL Handmade, and I wanted to welcome you to my video tutorial today. This is another one in the Marathon Sewciety sewing series, and today we are sewing up the MyUno. It's a pattern by KiteCoCreates, and let me just show you the bag that I made in this video. How adorable is this? I mean, how stinking cute. So, of course, I had to add a little quilted panel. I had to add the embroidery panel, and then I decided to quilt it, and I used contrasting stitching. This is a really cute pattern. On the inside, I added a slip pocket, and it has a really neat construction. It's a great little bag, great for if you wanted to add like a little gift bag. This would be perfect for the holidays, and it could be reusable, obviously. And like I said, mine is quilted. I used nylon, bonded nylon for the exterior. I used water-resistant canvas for the interior, and then I added fleece to the exterior pieces so that I could quilt it. And that is it. All right, so without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get started to making this cutie. So I decided to add this fun little embroidery design to the front panel of my bag. So here I'm just stitching it out, and I don't know about you, but I find watching embroidery stitch is kind of mesmerizing. And then after I got it all stitched out, I decided to quilt it as well. So I just added fusible fleece to the back, and I'm doing 1.5-inch quilt lines that are at a 45-degree angle. And then for the main panel, I decided to quilt around the outside of the main design and then quilted around the rest of the panel using that same 1.5-inch 45-degree angle. Now how I did this here is I just cut long strings, brought them to the back side and tied them off, and then I did that for each of the stitch lines as well. Now this does add some time to your project, so keep that in mind, but I think the end result is quite worth it. If you decide to do this, I recommend putting on your favorite music or maybe a podcast and just sit back and kind of zone out while you're doing the stitching, because it really does take a little bit of time. But like I said, so worth it in the end. All right, so now that we have our panels all quilted, I think it turned out pretty well. Takes a little bit of time, but I think it's a neat result in the end. So the first thing we're going to do is work on our front panel. So I'm going to set the back panel to the side. We need our exterior, front, bottom, and top, and then our lining, bottom and top, and our zipper with the zipper pull attached. All right, so we're going to attach the zipper to the top part first, the top part of our bag. So I have my zipper, my exterior, and my lining. I'm going to flip this around just because it's a little easier for me to work from this direction. So I want my zipper to open and close to the left. So since this is upside down, currently my zipper is opening and closing to the right. I'm going to take it, flip it over, align it with this long straight edge here, and clip it in place. Okay, once you get that clipped in place, you can go ahead and baste stitch this across, or if you live on the dangerous side like I do, you can go ahead and clip your lining up that straight edge again. So the lining is right sides down. So your two main fabric pieces will be right sides together with the zipper in the center. Now what we're going to do is stitch straight across this edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance is what I'm going to use, and then I'm going to flip both panels away from the zipper and then top stitch down the folded edge here at 1/8 of an inch. All right, once you get that stitched and then top stitched, now we're going to repeat the steps to attach the bottom here. So flipping this over again, we're going to line up our zipper with this top straight edge of our exterior, clipping in place all the way across. And then again, you can either baste stitch the zipper on first, or just go ahead and attach your lining, clip your lining in place, and sew it all at once. So right sides down with the lining, right sides together with the exterior, with our zipper panel sandwiched in the middle. and then we're going to sew across at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so again, once we get this clipped in place, we're going to stitch straight across at 1/4 of an inch, and then flipping both panels away from the zipper, we're going to top stitch down this bottom panel at 1/8 of an inch. All right, and now because I decided to quilt this after I cut the pieces out, you can see my lining is a little bit larger than the exterior. So I'm just going to trim it up. I'm just going to use my scissors and just trim it up so it's the same size. So tip, don't be like me. If you're going to quilt first and then trim your pieces out. Not a big deal because you can always trim them later, but it's just easier if you do them. If you do it first and then you cut it out, you don't have to worry about it. All right, so there is my front panel sewn together. My design just barely fit there, right up to the zipper. So very close. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to baste stitch all the way around. I probably will do a couple back stitches here at the zipper ends, but just baste stitching all the way around to hold it together, and that's going to help when we put it all together with the back side. All right, now that that is basted on, the last thing I'm going to do here, I'm just going to add a little grab handle to my bag. So I have a length of strap webbing here. I'm using 12 inches. I think you can make these really whatever size you want. If you want a longer handle, a shorter handle. You could also add tabs. The instructions provide, or the pattern provides instructions for adding tabs here if you want to turn it into a crossbody. So I'm just going to add this little grab handle. So what I want to do is find the center, and I'm just going to make a little snip here, a tiny snip. And then I'm going to measure out 2 inches. I'm going to center my handle right at that 2-inch mark. I'm going to play around with this and see how it looks, but I think that'll be a good measurement there. All right, so then between the handles, it's 3 inches. Let me just grab a clip here. All right, that might be a little narrow, so let's see. I'm just going to move it out a little bit. I'm using my other one as a guide. So I know, and then I will again measure everything at the end once I get it all attached. Just to make sure that I'm right from the sides. I'm a little bit, let me see, 2 and a hair, 2 and a hair. I think that's good. And then from the center, yeah. Yep, okay, that's good. All right, so what I'm going to do then is just baste stitch across the ends here, connecting the strap to our front panel. Okay, the last thing that I did here for the handle is I added a little bit of fray check just to the ends here of my strap, because it is a woven strap. I didn't want it to fray on the inside of the bag. Now, I will say I got a little bit ahead of myself. I got a little excited, so out comes my seam ripper. You do not want to baste around the bottom half. You're only basting around the top half. But you do want to baste along the sides of the zipper here to close those ends. But since I got ahead of myself, I am going to take a minute and just unpick the sides here, so bear with me. All right, now that I have that all picked, I have to laugh because I knew that these don't go together because of the way the construction is for the base. But like I said, got ahead of myself. So anyways, all fixed now. Nothing that you do cannot be undone or fixed. So I decided to leave my little mix-up in the video and we're just going to move on. All right, so what we want to do next is we want to grab our back and our front pieces. We're going to place them right sides together. All right, and then right along this bottom edge, we're going to clip the two exterior pieces only. Make sure your lining piece is out of the way. This is why I knew that it wasn't supposed to be that way. You know, it happens. All right, so we're clipping in along this straight edge here, and then making sure our lining stays out of the way, we're going to sew across this edge here according to the instructions in the pattern, using the seam allowance there. And then once we get that done, we're going to open it up. We're going to butterfly that seam open, so we're going to press each half of the seam allowance to its own side, and then flipping it over, we're going to top stitch down each side. Okay, now that that is top stitched there along the bottom, I'm going to flip this lining panel back down, take our other exterior, and match it up with the top here. So all of our panels should be aligned pretty well. And I'm going to clip in place along the sides. Oops. Lining everything up. Okay, so along the sides and along the top. Okay, and as you can see, the lining sticks out a little bit farther down here on the bottom. Now we need to put the remaining lining on this side. However, before I do that, I've decided that I want to add a slip pocket to my other lining piece. So I'm going to set this to the side just for now. I'm going to grab my slip pocket pieces. And then with my pocket, I'm going to fold it in half, right sides together, and I'm going to clip along the short sides. All right, so leaving this top edge open, we're going to sew down the short sides according to the seam allowance in the pattern. All right, once that is sewn, I'm just going to trim the corners just a little bit to help with bulk once I turn it through. It's probably more important to do it at the top where we're going to be attaching our accent piece, but I'll do it at both ends just to be consistent. Okay, once you get that done, we're going to turn it through. If you have a turning tool, go ahead and use it to help you poke out those corners. Okay, if you are using a cotton woven or a material that you can use with your iron, you can go ahead and give that a press to help hold all these corners down. I think mine is fine just like this. I'm using waterproof canvas or water resistant canvas, but it does hold the finger press pretty well. So I'm just going to leave it just like that. Now, with our little accent strip here, I'm using a piece of cork, so I'm going to flip it over to the wrong side, and then I have 1/2 inch double-sided tape here, which as you can see is almost the same width here as my piece of cork. All right, so I'm going to remove the paper backing and then bring this panel up to about halfway, maybe a little bit less than halfway because I need to fold it over the top. And I'm centering it. I'm just going to press it down That's going to help hold it on that side. And then I'm going to take the top edge here and fold it over. All the way across. You can add a couple clips here if you prefer. I'm going to do that just to help hold it. I don't want it going anywhere on me while I'm trying to sew it. Okay, once you get that sewn, we're going to trim off these extra pieces here. So let's go ahead and do that now. You can do it after you sew, but it might be a little bit easier to do it so you know exactly where you're going to start and stop. Okay, now we're going to just top stitch right along this edge here at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your little accent strip sewn on, now what we need to do is attach it to our lining panel. So there is a measurement provided in the pattern. What I'm doing here is I'm just folding it in half to find the center of my panel. And then I'm going to fold this in half to also find the center of my pocket. And I'm going to match up those center folds. Now there is a measurement provided in the pattern for how far up you're going to measure from the bottom of your pocket. And I've already marked that with a pen, so I've just lined mine up right here. And let me see, I should have a couple straight pins. I'm going to just pin these two panels together so that they don't go anywhere while I'm trying to sew. All right, and then here you have an option. You can either make one big pocket. You could split it right down the middle. You could make it a little bit narrower on one side, so maybe you could put in, depending on what you're going to use this for, you could put in a pen, or if you're going to use it for a cosmetic bag, you can put in a makeup tube of some sort, brushes, if it's a smaller brush, stuff like that. So, all right, I am going to go ahead and sew this on, and I haven't decided pockets yet, so we'll see what happens. All right, there we go. So I decided to go ahead and just split my pocket right in half, so I have two pockets of the same size. I thought that could be cute for, I'm not really sure what I'm going to use this bag for just yet, but maybe mints or gum or I don't know, any little thing. And then I also decided to add a woven label here. This is my little logo, K-Dill. I added it to the side of the pocket. It's just a neat spot if you wanted to add a woven label to your bag. That's a good spot to do it. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to lay this down. So with our already clipped piece lining side up, we're going to take our piece with the pocket, flip it over so it is right sides down. And then we're going to clip that in place all together. So all the layers will be clipped in place here. Okay, once that is clipped, now we are going to sew all the way around this clipped edge. So starting here, we're going to come all the way around, follow the curves all the way down, starting and stopping at each end according to the seam allowance provided in the pattern. Do not do anything with this down here just yet. We're only sewing these three sides. All right, so that is sewn. What we're going to do next is trim these corners. So as you can see, this is how it looks. Pretty interesting, huh? All right, so using your pinking shears, if you have pinking shears, if you don't, I would just trim a little bit of the excess around the corner. Just go ahead and trim that off. That's going to help us to get our corners turned out nicely and avoid some of the bulk there. If you don't have pinking shears, you can always make little clips up to your stitch line. You could also cut little V notches. So if you were to come in and say cut like this and cut like this and make a little V notch out of there, that would work as well if you don't have pinking shears. Okay. Once those corners are trimmed, now what we want to do is we want to grab our linings. So our linings are already right sides together. We're going to clip in place along the bottom. And we're going to sew this bottom seam, but not very far, because we want as big of a turning opening as we can here, because we have to turn this whole bag through this opening. So we're only going to sew maybe about 1 inch. So using the seam allowance in the pattern, we're going to sew from this edge here in by about 1 inch, and then come down here. So we're making like a little half of a box. So across and down, remembering to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Okay, here is where the bag gets really interesting. So we have that sewn, your little corners are still unsewn. We have just our linings tacked down right here. So now we're going to come around here, and just with the exterior, we're going to match up the side seam and the bottom seam, and only on the exterior. So we're trying to pull the lining out of the way. We're going to clip it in place. I'm going to add a couple at the ends, and then a couple, or at least one on the side. You could also use stapler, something strong. You just don't want these clips to go anywhere. We're going to be turning this bag through with the clips on, so we just want to make sure the clips aren't going to go anywhere. So again, coming over to this side, doing the same thing, matching up our side seam and our bottom seam. We're going to clip that side, and then again, only clipping the exterior, so we're pulling the lining out of the way. We're going to clip here. And down this side. Okay, so that's what it looks like. It's a little tight, especially on this side, but that's what we want. So now what we're going to do is we're going to reach in, and we should be able to turn the bag through. It's going to take some work, but just go ahead and turn your bag through this opening. I think all my clips survived. They look like they're all still intact. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to, through the opening in our lining, we want to pull that exterior base out. Okay, so like I said, it's a little tight, so just work with it. Now we're going to match up. You might have to do some wiggling here. We're going to match up our lining, and we're going to clip these all together. So let me see, I'm going to grab, I have some clips that are a little bit stronger. So I'm going to, once I get the center lined up here, I'm going to put the stronger clip here in the middle. And then again, clipping, lining up our lining and our exterior. And it's a bit fiddly, so just take your time. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay, once you get that, actually let me put that seam allowance back over. There we go. All right, once you get that all clipped in place, we are going to sew across this edge here according to the seam allowance provided in the pattern. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Sewn together, excuse me, sewn together. I'm just going to trim it straight across so I have a nice even edge there. Okay, and then I'm going to push this through. And the neat part about this way of constructing is that it holds our lining down, so we're not going to end up with a baggy lining at the end. So it might seem a little bit wild and crazy, like what the world are we doing? But it will give you a really nice finish at the end. All right, so we're doing the same exact thing to the other side, pulling the lining out, matching up that bottom seam. Again, I'm going to use one of the strong clips here. And then I'm going to take it to the machine and do the same thing. Come back, trim the corners, and turn this through as well. Okay, now once we have that all done there, what we need to do is we need to close this opening. So I will say that Jill, the designer from KiteCoCreates, has a video where she shows you putting in a piece of plastic, like from one of those thin cutting mats that you would get from the dollar store. You could cut a piece of plastic if you wanted to add that, and then slide it in to give you a nice firm base. I think, well, obviously I'm not going to do that since I'm already clipping mine closed, but that is an option if you would like to do that. The other thing to consider is if you do that, you most likely are going to have to hand stitch, whip stitch your seam closed, because it'll be too hard to get it to the sewing machine. Okay, so once you have that clipped in place, what we're going to do is sew straight across this edge, and I'm going to try to sew mine at about 1/16 of an inch, so as close as I can get to the edge of this fabric while still catching both sides. So I will do that and be back to show the final steps. All right, so I have that stitched. It looks pretty good. Now what we need to do is open up our zipper and turn the whole bag right side out. All right, get in there and poke out those rounded corners. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to close the zipper for now. The last step, and this is an optional step, but I think I agree with Jill that it would look really nice to have this little finishing step here just to help the top to be held closed, is that we are going to top stitch along. I'm going to hold this way. This is a fat seam since I added fleece to mine. It is a bit of a fat seam here at the top with all these layers. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to start probably about where our top stitching line is. We're going to start there. We're going to top stitch along, starting up around the curve along this straight edge here, and then come down, ending here again, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. All right, there we go. So it is top stitched. So the last thing I did is I just added a decorative rivet on either side here. That is totally optional, but I just thought it was a nice feature to add. And there is my quilted bag. It's so cute. And then when you open it up on the inside, you've got your two little slip pockets here, a nice big lining here with that base. You could even just set it open, and depending on what you're using, just leave it like that so it's easy access. If you're using it as a bathroom bag, you could use the handle, hook it on a hook, and then all your stuff is right there, ready to go. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, this is the MyUno by KiteCoCreates, and I will link to that in the video description. If you enjoyed this video and if you would like to see more, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell notification so that you know when I have new videos dropping. Thank you so much again, and thank you for supporting me and for the other sewists in the Marathon Society. And I hope you have a great day of sewing, and I'll catch you on the next one.